My name's Joe Fishel. I've been in the industry, in the biomed industry now for 45 years. I've held different positions as a Navy biomed, Navy corpsman. I've been a manager at University of Maryland. I've been a supervisor at Dimensions Healthcare. I worked with various positions for Kaiser Permanente here locally. I work for Service Master down at Suburban Hospital, Doctors Community Hospital. So I've got a lot of ties to this area. How many of you are Biomed 1s? Okay. Biomed 2s? Okay. Biomed 3s? Managers? Okay. So the talk I'm going to give here today is applicable to all of us. I sometimes give this talk to high school students, also electronics students at colleges, to sort of give them an idea, because when you were growing up, did you know what you wanted to do? I mean, my guidance counselor gave us these tests, and one of them said that I should be a forest ranger, and another one, said that I should be doing something else. And it's more like what you'd like, and rather than really what you're qualified for. And so I grew up in a very small town called Huntington, Pennsylvania. Half of the kids in my class came off of farms. 1/4 of them were probably what we called townies, and then the other fourth was just sort of like urbanites or suburbanites of this small town. There was no work there really for anybody that was under 21. We had a state correctional institution, and you had to be 21 to work there at the prison. The joke amongst us when we go back for a class reunion, oh, where's so-and-so? Oh, he's over at SCI as working there as a guest. We had an Owens Corning fiberglass, and it was union. And if you weren't a relation to somebody who was in the union, you just didn't get on. So for me, I took the ASVAB test, and I qualified for everything the Navy had, including their nuclear propulsion. But I got to looking at another program they had, which was biomedical repair. And for some of you who may not be aware of this, the Navy has a 6-year enlistment policy. You sign up, you're signing up for 6 years. It may be 2 years active, 4 years inactive, 3 years active, 3 years inactive, 4 years active, 2 years inactive, or you just do the whole 6. And I chose to do the whole 6. I was given the hospital course school as my A school, and then after I completed that, I was able to go on to the C school, which was biomedical repair. So who is only in charge of your career? It's you. But a lot of people sort of put their career in the company's hands and say, well, they'll promote me. And I grew up with a lot of myths. And these are some of the myths. You get on with a good company and you will rise to the top every time. How many of you have heard that one? Okay. Work hard, you will be promoted. How many have heard that one? And the company will take care of you. Guess what? These are myths. They are not that way. A company will take care of you until they don't need you anymore, and then they'll let you go. They have no remorse. They're a company. I worked as a recruiter for 3 years in between biomedical positions. And during that period of time, I talked to over 6,000 biomeds and imaging engineers across the country. Nobody ever came in and told me, I don't like my company. They all said the same thing. I like my company, but I don't like my manager. And it made me think about, okay, why is this going on? And you're a commodity. Okay, the company needs you to fix the equipment so that they can collect the money, or the hospital needs you to fix the equipment. I've gone through several turnovers at different places where I was working for a third party and they decided to go in-house. Working for a hospital, they decided to outsource. So the industry has been changing a lot, and there's no real anything that's really solid except for you yourself. And this is why I'm talking about this. This is what you have to do. You can control a lot of things, but there's some things you can't control. You can't control murders. You can't control, mass layoffs. Okay. And so if you have to hit the market, you need to be the best you that you can be. So back in 1978, when I graduated from biomedical repair school, we had a few options to us. Military, you were an entry-level biomed, and then at that time they had advanced electronics, which was your monitors, EKGs, lab equipment, and then you had the imaging side. And so you had to make a decision back then, going which way. My class happened to be, they finally got smart and decided we're going to send them through both schools. And so that we learned stuff on both sides of the house. So, you didn't have to, you were not limited to where you could go. You could go just about anywhere. Computer chips were just coming out. As a matter of fact, the 8088 microprocessor had just come out when I graduated. We had a diagram of it and showing what it was, how it worked a little bit, but everything was hardwired and electronic. Logic, vacuum tubes, a little bit of transistors, and the chips are just coming out, your TTL logic, your microchips. Now, in 2023, the opportunities are a whole lot different. As a biomed, you can specialize in monitors, EKG, dialysis, robotic surgeries, ventilators. On the imaging side, CT, cath, nuclear med, PET, rad, fluoro, and all the other things in there as far as like portables and what have you. Then you have networking opportunities. We didn't have networking opportunities. Everything was, all monitors were hardwired back then. So you have PACS and the monitors, and RIS integration, wireless integration. Cybersecurity is the big one that's just come out in the last 5 years. So there's the networking side along with cybersecurity, and a lot of the new industries are in cybersecurity. And then you get into management. So management, you were either a manager back then or you was a worker. There was no leads, there was no supervisors, there was no managers, there was no directors. It was either you were the manager or you were the, and it's like, how do you get from being a biomed 1, being a manager? How do you get from being a biomed 1 to specializing in one of these? It depends on what you want to do. In other words, what is your ultimate goal, where you want to be when you retire? So my boss said when I was recruiting, he called this the pyramid effect of employment. Down here you got the Braves, the women, the children, medicine men, arrow makers, maybe the people that went out and hunted. And above them, you had like clan chiefs or war chiefs. And then at the very top, you had the tribal chief. Well, not everybody can get into the tribal chief position. That was a position that you sort of speak had to work your way up into. And employment today is the same way. Some of the basic requirements is electronic training, high school diploma, COVID shot. That's a new one. A lot of people won't hire you unless you have a COVID shot. A driver's license is another thing, because even if you work in a hospital, you may have to drive out to a clinic somewhere to do service. Then you can start looking at some of the specializations, CT training, imaging training, OEM or third party, RSTI, PACS and networking. And then finally you get up to like a CT engineer. So what I had was guys that were saying, I want to go to work for Marquette. Now, many of you may not know who Marquette was, but originally GE had a monitoring product. They sold it to Marquette. After about 10, 15 years, Marquette sold it back to GE. I had guys that were biomed 3s as a recruiter, had every school that Marquette had. And I'm talking to the Marquette vice president of operations as a recruiter. And he told me, he says, I won't take any technician that doesn't have an associate's degree. Well, I heard from a lot of military biomeds who they had the opportunity to get the associate's degree, but they never bothered with it. Well, I'm a military biomed, you know, I mean, they'll recognize that. Yeah, they recognize it as training. But what they were looking for was to set the bar so that the minimum requirement was that you had an associate's degree. They didn't care if it was associate's in electronics, associates in pastoral care, just as long as it was an associate's degree.
Get it now.
Huh?
You get it now.
Yeah.
When you go to the schoolhouse now, you get an associate's degree from the University of Air Force, no matter which branch you are.
When I went through back at Fitzsimmons, we had to have 18 credit hours that we had to get on our own. I clept it and took one course in college, but back then you didn't. And still we have people out there today who went through the older school, went through the military, got a lot of experience, are good biomed techs, they don't have that degree. So this sort of blocks people from moving up or being, you know, it's like not qualified for the job. So here's another pyramid. This is the Washington Mines, just down the road here a little bit. There was a company called Dornier. They made lithotripsy equipment. You had an X-ray machine, fluoro. You could see where the kidney stone was, and then it had these sound heads that they would position around. They would, underwater, they would bombard the patient with this ultrasound and sound to break up the stone. That's the only thing these guys knew how to fix. They didn't know how to fix anything else, just the Dornier equipment. When Dornier went out of business, they laid all their technicians off. And I had a whole bunch of Dornier X-ray guys that knew all about the Dornier systems, but they had nothing to fall back on. And a lot of people back then didn't want to give them a chance. GE, Philips, Siemens, even the third-party X-ray companies didn't want to give these guys a chance to learn something else. And so a lot of them moved out of our field instead of being able to get trained and trained up. And they made very, very good money, but they sort of priced themselves out of the market because none of them wanted to take a cut in pay because they didn't have the skills that the market wanted. So the importance of having a broad repertoire of skills is makes you more valuable. You become more marketable, opens up more options and opportunity for employment. How many of you have an associate's degree? Okay. For the managers, any of you have a bachelor's degree? Okay. How about a master's degree? Yeah, I can say that, but not. As I was coming up through, there was times when I had everything there, but I didn't have a degree that they're at the level they were using, and it really stunted my ability to move up into management. So I went back and I got my bachelor's degree. That moved me up into management. And when I moved up into management, I found that I was having to deal more with nurses that had their MBA in nursing and the doctors who had their doctorates. And I felt that I needed to, so that they weren't talking to that lowly biomed tech. Wait a second, they're talking to Joe. Joe's got his MBA, and he's up where I am. And it changed the difference in the way people reacted to me. Think about this. I have a tech. He walks into a Toshiba X-ray room. He's trained on Siemens, GE, and Philips. And he says to the director of X-ray, "Well, I've never worked on one of these things, and I'll see what I can do, and maybe I can get it fixed." 5 minutes later, I was getting a phone call from that director. And she was saying, "Why are you sending somebody down here who doesn't know anything about my machines?" The guy knew all about how to change a collimator bulb and adjust the collimator so that everything lined up. But he was setting himself up for failure and didn't even realize it. I asked him, I said, "Why do you tell them this?" He said, "Well, that way if I fix it, I look like a hero." I'm like, if you wouldn't have said that and fixed it, you'd look like a hero anyways, because it was broken and you fixed it. and how we come across and what we talk about as far as what training we've had. Defibrillators is another one, okay? I've been trained on, like, I'd say trained in the military, I trained on 2 different types of defibrillators. That's what they put in front of me to work on. That's what they trained me on. But a lot of it is basics. And so you as a biomed, think about the different things that you do in your job. What equipment are you real familiar with? What equipment do you feel comfortable with? And I know there's going to be some stuff you don't feel comfortable with, because I walked into a room the other night at 4 o'clock in the morning to work on something called a Prismax I'd never seen before. But I figured out how to make the thing work. So you can't control the nurses, you can't control the doctors, but you can control yourself. You can control your responses and how you react to things. The reason I was in there at 4 o'clock is because one of my techs was real smart. He said, well, Baxter doesn't open up till 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. There's nothing I can do. That's not what the nursing staff wanted to hear. They wanted somebody to just come in, if nothing else, hold their hand, try and see if we could make the machine work and see what we could do. That hurts the biomed field, it hurts the biomed shop when somebody, now he was absolutely right. Baxter didn't open up until 8 o'clock. Or as they say at 7 o'clock Central Time, but it was 8 o'clock Eastern Time. So he wasn't trained on the machine, but it was just a matter of going through to make sure that the circuit that plugs into this machine was plugged in right. What we found was they had plugged it in, but they hadn't put the little latch down. And as soon as we put the little latch down, everything went green and it was ready to use. So it's a very simple fix, but going in there. Getting schools. When I was, I'm being honest, I've been to low red school back in about 87. There was a thing called zero radiography, which was like a Xerox machine that uses charged aluminum plates that you would put in for a mammogram. You take the picture, it charges the plate, you take the plate through, you dust it with this blue dust, called it Smurf dust. And then it blows it off, and then it heats up a piece of paper that's waxed, and it would mold together the two of them. That technology is no longer around. And I was trained on the Dimensions lab analyzer. That's the 3 machines that I've ever been trained on by the manufacturer. Everything else I've had to do is learning by on the job. This is a pair of penny loafers, and this is actually a RKS 298 Real World of Employment. This was what the recruiter I was working for, who owned the company, he actually had a trademark. Back in his day, when he was a young teenager, you could buy a pair of penny loafers for $2.98. If you had $2.96, you couldn't buy them. If you did $2.97, you couldn't buy them. And employment is very much like that. So the real world of employment is, what position are you looking for? Are you looking to go the manager path? Are you looking to go into the X-ray path? Are you looking to get into the high end, like get into anesthesia, ventilators, things like that? It's you who has to decide what interests you and the way you want to go. Am I making sense on this so far? Hopefully. So what a lot of people don't do is they don't look at the requirements for what the position. That one guy I was telling you about that wanted to go, he had all the schools for Marquette. Well, one thing on there was that you had to have an associate's degree. And trying to get him to understand you don't have the associate's degree. And yes, I know you can fix everything they've got. You're probably fixing it already, but if you don't have that degree, you can't get it. So when I'm talking to high school students, I ask them to take a look at, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I have a little sheet for them, especially for the high schoolers, because I tell them to call somebody up and ask them, how did you become this? How did you become a CT operator? How did you become a rad tech? What do you have to do to become a lab tech? oh, there's two different levels of a lab tech. There's a 4-year and a 2-year. Not everybody is cut for college. Not a lot of people, especially in my area over where I live in Delaware. A lot of the people over there just don't have the funds to send their kids off to college, so they have to deal with getting scholarships if they can, or student loans. And of course, the student loans have been killing people. I mean, even the lawyers are now suing Harvard because they can't get jobs with their Harvard law degree. So what are the alternatives? And I tell them to go talk to somebody who's in that position to find out what requirements do you have to have for this position. What do I need to know? What do I need to have? What certifications do I need to have? What education do I need to have? Where can I get that education? And on top of all that, then it's just a matter of, if you had to do this over again, what would you do? You know, some of the lab techs will tell you, well, I found out after I got into the lab tech that I don't need to have a 4-year degree. You know, the 2-year degree would have been suffice. So it's really finding out, you know, what would you do different if you were, you know, going for these positions? You know, do you have the requirements for the next position? I mean, do you know what it takes to go from Biomed 1 to Biomed 2 to Biomed 3? Do you know what they are? Are you working on where you're at? And then do you have all of the requirements for that next position? Too often, and this is, I've experienced this, I had a company once tell, I said to them, I said, I applied for that position. I said, what didn't I have, you know, that kept me from having that position? They said, oh, you had everything. I said, so why wasn't I promoted to that position? Well, it was easier for us to keep you in your position and just hire somebody from outside for that position. I mean, that really hurt me. I did. I mean, I was, I won't say I was devastated, but it was like, okay. So there's no position here really for me to move up, because that was the next position for me to move up, and you're going outside the company, coming back in, you know, with somebody new. I don't know if you can see this, but I just pulled this off the Amy website on last Sunday. I'll read off these requirements. This is for a BMed 2 for some hospital. High school graduate or equivalent, at least 5 years experience as a biomedical equipment technician. A certified biomedical equipment technician, BMed preferred. You all heard, as I don't know if any of you have heard the Amy, you know, how to get those certifications. At least 5 manufacturers training schools on equipment at XXX Health, whatever this hospital is. Well, dang, I consider myself a senior BMed, and I've only had 3 schools. And so, you know, it's like you can't get those schools a lot of times unless you're working at a facility and the facility sponsors you. And at the same time, the facility will sponsor you, but you have to sign an agreement that you'll continue to work for them for 2 years or 3 years. And if you leave, you have to pay them back for that training. How many have seen that in there? Yeah. Proficiency in operation and or repair of life support equipment, general computer knowledge, knowledge of state and local safety codes, work on call, weekends, days or nights, valid driver's license. Look at that. That one's still in there. Teach, encourage, and promote positive behavior of coworkers. Language communication skills, ability to utilize the internet, extranet, and email, ability to utilize radio and paging system. And the one thing that was down in the lower requirements was you got to have a COVID job. So even though I am at the level I am, I qualify for it. How many of the Biomed 1s here qualify for this position? Okay, you got the 5 schools? I know, but do you have the 5 manufacturing schools? So, you know, hospitals are getting a little bit choosy on some of their requirements. And this wasn't no like big medical center. This was just about a 300-bed hospital that was looking for this. So when should you be preparing for your next position? I had the opportunity when I was working for Service Master, which is no longer in business, they sold out to Aramark, and now Aramark sold out to Trimedics. To be able to start a semester down here, it's now called Adventist University in Trumbull Park. The company paid for my 2 courses for the first semester. And then after I finished up the 2 semesters, that first semester, I turned in my paperwork to get reimbursed and then to sign up for the next 2 courses. And then they told me, they said, oh, you biomed guys are using this too much. We're only going to allow the housekeepers to go to college, the housekeeping managers to go get a degree. So fast forward about 3 years after that, I was getting ready to leave the company. And what was the first thing out of my director's mouth? Well, if you leave, you're going to have to pay us back. Well, I had gone ahead and got student loans, and I continued to invest in myself. I mean, that was something I could do. I mean, they wouldn't send me to any of the manufacturer schools, but I could invest myself by getting my degree. Once you get that education, they can't take that away from you. That's yours. And I paid for it. And imagine his surprise when I said, well, you can look it up, but I said that was paid about a year ago for the 2 classes that you sent that I was able to put on the company's tab. I said, the rest of it is all in mine. Unless you're willing to pay my student loan, I said, I'm sorry. I said, enough was enough. I mean, again, it was one of those things. I liked the company, but I was quitting the manager. So I knew what that felt like. I mean, if you are still a biomed with 21 years of experience, you are still a biomed. One, I mean, now it's 7 times over. I would have guys call me up and say, oh yeah, man, I've been a biomed for 21 years. So what level do they have you there at the hospital? Well, I'm a biomed 1 here, but I want to move up to biomed 2. Now I got 21 years. So what equipment are you repairing? Well, I'm fixing beds, I'm fixing IV pumps and sequential compression devices. What else? Well, that's what I fix. Okay, I can understand now why you're still a biomed 1 after 21 years. He wasn't taking on any responsibility. He wasn't trying to fix anything. At Dimensions, I had a biomed 1 female. I got nothing against females. She'd go up, she'd grab a monitor or whatever it was out of the women's area and bring it down. And she'd say, okay, here it is, guys. I brought it down. Fix it. I said, Diane, why don't you fix it? Well, I don't know nothing about that. I might break it. Diane, it's already broken. It's already broken. And she's like, well, I don't know how to fix these. Now, this was a Space Labs monitor, okay? And I think I had about 30 broken Space Labs monitor in the back room. So I had lots of parts. So I showed her how to run my fingers up against the screen because we had no screen. Well, those of you who have knuckle hair, you can sort of feel the static electricity if you've got high voltage on the CRT. Yeah, CRTs, not LEDs. And so I showed her how to fix, or how to diagnose a high voltage problem on the unit. Well, she put the new, well, not right now, she got one out of the back room, put the high voltage probe or the flyback transformer on there. And I heard her scream, and I'm like, okay, she got shocked. I went running out there, and I said, what's the matter? You all right? Yeah, but look at the image. The image was upside down and reversed. She put the yoke on backwards. She didn't know. So I said, relax. And we discharged it, we turned it off, discharged it. She flipped it around and put it on. And then I showed her how to adjust it for focus. And she was so proud. I mean, I gave her coaching, but she fixed it. And after that, she says, would you mind if I took a look at those ones in the back room and see if I could, maybe try working on those and get some experience on these? Nope, go ahead. She taught herself sort of with all these broken monitors how to fix them. She became my best Space Labs technician there. So you have to reach out sometimes and take some initiative on yourself You know, if there's a new piece of equipment coming into the hospital and it enters you, hey, I wouldn't mind becoming the focus on this. You know, can I at least spend the time when they do the orientation to the nurses or the doctors, sort of seeing how things work there. So when this is where managers are going to hate me, and I'm sorry about this, but this is the real world. It takes you about 6 months to learn your job, and it's really a good 6 months. But at the end of that, you know the job. Another 2.5 months or 2 years to 6 months onto that, you've now not only know your job, you know it well. You feel comfortable, you're experienced with it, you've seen more than one issue. And the reason I say that is because there have been some CT guys, they got sent off to school, they worked on one CT, and they're calling me up like 6 months after they've been to school and say, yeah, I'm a CT guy. How long have you been working on CTs? Well, I went to school and I've been working on them now for 6 months. You know, I want to get out of here. I want to get more pay. Wait a second. The hospital did invest money in to send you to school, and you haven't seen enough problems on that CT to really understand all the different problems you could have. So at the end of 3 years, how many are sort of at that point right now, where they're at right now in the same position for 3 years? A couple of them. What you have to do is take a look and say, okay, what is my next step? Is it becoming a biomed 2, biomed 3? You know, what do I want to be in 10 years? Where do I want to be? Do I want to be moving over into the CT scanners? Do I want to be moving over into dialysis? What is it that interests you, and where do you want to be? I mean, if you want to be a manager, so this is the time where you look out about 10 years, because the next job you take, you want to be preparing yourself for that next position. You know, you're now in a position to evaluate where you are with your current company. And the one thing that you can control is being the best that you can be. I know that's probably you're an Army or an Air Force slogan, be the best that you can be, but it's the truth. You know, if you're doing the best that you can do, you can control your attitude, you can control your responses, you can control, you know, what you do with your documentation. All of this is your own self-importance, and it defines you in the industry. So it's very important for you to take a look at this. So how many of you know where you want to be in 10 years? Sort of, I mean, if you know, are you in a position now where your next move moves you up, or is it a lateral move? Right now, what's going on in the industry is that a lot of biomed ones who have not necessarily, I'll say, put in their time, but they haven't learned all the equipment that a biomed one should be knowing. And so companies will say, hey, you know, come on over to work for us, we'll make you a biomed too. Well, if any of you listened to what John said this morning, there's the prestige of being a biomed too. A little bit more money for being a biomed too. But once you get into that position, they're expecting you to be a biomed too. And I see a lot of biomed ones right now setting themselves up for failure because they get over, and the expectation is as a biomed too that you can just about work on all the biomed stuff, monitors, centrifuges, dialysis, a lot of this stuff, and you should be able to be working on, but they don't have the experience, and it sets them up for failure whenever they aren't able to produce. Because I'm hiring somebody to fix the equipment, not to manage the vendor, because I save money as a manager when they're fixing the equipment. We're buying the parts, we're putting the parts in. I mean, for some of these companies, it's $250 to $300 an hour, and they've got a minimum. Well, actually, Draeger right now, to do a PM, because I just don't have anybody trained yet in that, it's a minimum of $500 an hour with a minimum of 2 hours for travel and 2 hours for repair. or just to do a PM. So we're now looking at $2,000 to do a PM. My guy, that doesn't include the parts because the PM kit I think is about $500 unless there's a little thing called a PAG that's $3,400 that needs to be replaced. I'm able to save money because we're not paying the manufacturer these high prices. And the manufacturer, I guarantee you, they're not paying their technicians the $300 an hour. They're more down in the 26 to 28 range. So it really, that's how you can help the institutions where your earnings are at, to help, save the money. Also, if you're able to save the money, the manager looks at, hey, I recognize Jeanette, I recognize Jim. They go out of their way to make sure that the equipment's up, the equipment's working, and they are trying to save us money by doing the repairs or doing in-depth diagnosis of the equipment. I've got a rule in my shop is nothing goes out of here unless it can be used on you, your wife, your kids, even your mother-in-law. So, moving along here. So when do people mostly change jobs? For those that are in the military, they're changing jobs because they put their 20 in, they put their 25 in, and now they're looking to move on the outside. My generation has sort of paved the way in the sense that, you have military biomed down there, and people know that you not only have the training, but you have experience because you had to put your time in after you went to school. And so you've seen, a lot of different equipment to repair. So fired, laid off, company goes out of business, reorganization, and you have to take whatever job you can find because, all of a sudden you're without a paycheck. I've had every one of them happen to me. Well, not really a fired, more it was like a layoff where they say, oh, we're discontinuing we're eliminating your job. So, you've got 3 weeks of pay coming and we'll see you later. And sometimes it takes you by surprise. You don't know that there's a layoff coming. You don't know that the hospital you're working for has decided to go outsource. You don't have a control about that. You have no control about that. What you do have control over is yourself and the decisions you make. If you have a plan, that will at least help you to understand when you're evaluating your next position. Employees get upset with management and have had enough and quit. I had a friend of mine, he says, I've had it with GE, I quit. I said, what are you gonna do? He says, I don't know, but I'm not working for GE. He said, I came over to GE third-party X-ray. They promised me I was gonna go to schools. He said, that was 6 years ago, and he says, they haven't sent me to a single school. And, when we go over to the next company, we have sort of some faith that they're going to be honest and upfront with us. They're going to, they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And when they don't, it's very disappointing. And you start losing confidence in the company and especially the manager that was there. You're offered a little bit more money to switch companies. And, up here, we got a lot of hospitals in the Baltimore, DC area. So it's not that hard to switch from University of Maryland over to Mercy or to Johns Hopkins or any of the University of Maryland outlying facilities or any of the Johns Hopkins outlying facilities, for an extra $1 or $2. Now, I'm not saying money's not important, but what else are you going to get out of there? Are they going to be able to help you further your career? Are they going to help you get those 5 schools that you need to move from a Biomed 1 to a Biomed 2? Are they going to have a education program where you can go to college and they help you out? My problem with the University of Maryland when I was there was I could take the master's course for MBA, but it was only during the day. Well, they weren't going to let me off to go down to University Park to attend the college down there. And they had a night and weekend course, but because I was an employee, they didn't want to allow me into that program either because we had so many other people that were paying cash for it. And, it boils down to, who's making the money. I had to go out on my own and get that myself. A new company offers schooling to come over. Like I said, they offer it. I had a company, an X-ray company says, oh yeah, come on over. He says, we'll send you off. We're Toshiba, Lorad, and Raytheon dealer. And we'll send you to those schools so you can fix the equipment. Well, the hospital I was working at had Raytheon equipment. They didn't have any of that. And so they did send me off into the school for this because Raytheon had gone out of business. Not Raytheon. Zonix. Someone is promoted over them. I talked about that earlier. I was going, for a position, and they promoted the other guy, and he had no idea. He lasted about a year in that position. That told me, oh, okay, they really don't know what I do. They don't respect what I do. I went to another division, and I'll be honest, it's Kaiser Permanente. South Baltimore County Medical Center, if any of you are familiar with it, south of Baltimore. I was the operations manager and built it. There's a I-beam up there, it's got my name written right on it, along with everybody else that was part of that project. I got a very large increase in pay, and everything that I was doing there, I was over facilities, clinical engineering, materials management, security, housekeeping. The only thing I didn't control was the nurses, the doctors, and the CNAs. Everybody else pretty much fell underneath me. So sometimes you have to look at what the position is and then look what an alternative is. And sometimes you have to turn away from what you're doing. When I worked at the University of Maryland Medical Center, I was laid off, reorganization. We got a new VP in and he was trying to cut costs. And the director he was a new director, didn't realize what I was doing until about 4 months later, when all of a sudden his budget was like $12 million over budget. Couldn't figure out why. It's because people weren't doing proper accruals. I took a position down at Dimensions Healthcare as a working supervisor. And why did I step back? Because partway around the Beltway was the university that I went to get my MBA. So I stepped back in position so that I had the time available. I could get off work, head over to college. It's an Adventist healthcare, and I'm sorry if anybody's Adventist, but I used to order in Pizza Hut, the Supreme, and sell the slices for $3 a piece to. They're a vegetarian type of university, but I always had a line right there buying the pizza, buying slices of pizza off me. But it was a step back, but it helped me because then I got my MBA. And lo and behold, there had been a position by Kaiser that you had to have an MBA for that position. I had seen it earlier, about a year before, but I didn't have the MBA, so I wasn't qualified. Now all of a sudden I have the MBA, I'm qualified. So I was able to move on into that position. Let's see. Sometimes people take a position for location, not picking on the military, but a lot of times when military guys are getting out, and I was a recruiter, they want to move back home, either where their wives were from or where they were from. And this is a true story. I had a guy in Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. There's one hospital in Punxsutawney. It's like a 50-bed hospital. And at the time, there was a company called ISS that I was working for, and they were the service company for that. This guy was driving 75 miles one way down to Pittsburgh to work down there. He says, I want a job in Punxsutawney. I said, okay. ISS is hiring. No, I don't want to work for ISS. Well, Punxsutawney only has one hospital. And ISS is taking care of Brookville and Punxsutawney and Du Bois, which is the 3 hospitals in his area. I said, I can't help you. I mean, how about a field service? Nope, I don't want field service. I want to work in a hospital. It's got to be in Punxsutawney. I said, well, they're not going to cut their contract with ISS just to hire you. But he limited himself, and ISS would have made him a Biomed 3 because he actually had the qualifications for it. But instead, he went down to Pittsburgh and he was a Biomed 1 down. And they had so many Biomed 2s and 3s that there was no place for him to advance up. So this is a definition of a career change. One of the easiest ways to define a career change is when you use the skills you gain from one profession and apply them to a completely new career. For example, someone who worked in corporate accounting but transitioned to providing financial services for a nonprofit has made a career change. That's one definition of it. The other definition is right there, as far as you use the skills you gain from one level or the next level as a biomed. So am I making sense on this here? Because you're the one that's going to make the decision on, and I'll be honest with you, I have lived in Portsmouth, Virginia, California, Colorado, New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Maryland, Delaware, and I'm now working down in Georgia. It's one of the other things that some people, if you don't know what you want to do, okay, there are some companies out there, Intermed, MMS, they're always looking for traveling techs to sort of allow you to go out. I mean, the Navy moved my butt around a lot. Oh, I forgot Okinawa, Japan, and Korea, South Korea. I was there servicing, medical equipment. But there's a lot of opportunities out there for you to take a look at. And you're the one that's going to decide which direction you go. Am I going to go? And I haven't even really talked about the OEMs, because the OEMs are sort of fickle. I mean, sometimes they'll take a biomed, sometimes they'll take a kid right out of technical school, because that way they can train them the way they want them. They can train them in their way of customer service. They can train them how to fix their equipment. Again, it's very narrow because they will have their own internal progression. You learn how to fix an RNF room, and then you learn how to fix a C arm, and then you're fixing a rad room. Well, it might be some time, before they move you into a cath room. Even though the generators may be the same, the table may be the same. They have their own progression as far as how you progress. But it's still based on skills. It's based on your knowledge. It's based on your eagerness to take on and learn new stuff. When you turn in your resignation, you will probably be offered a counter offer. And I knew it, but I did it anyways. I was working at the University of Maryland Medical Center. Our director left, went to Mercy. He says, Joe, I want you to come on over with me. And he offered me about $15,000 more than what I was making at the university. He knew what I was making because he was my director. And when I turned in my resignation, they said to me, oh, we can't believe that the little hospital across town is willing to offer you more money than what we pay. Or, they can't be paying you more than what we are. But yeah, they are. They're willing to pay me $15,000 more money. I stayed. And this is what happens when you stay. They know you're willing to leave. They know your loyalty might go somewhere else. That if you're willing to leave, that means you're not really happy with the situation where you're at. And so they will literally work at figuring out your replacement. And then come down, some day of the week in the afternoon and say, Joe, we don't need you anymore. We're eliminating your position. That sort of backfired on them because they said they eliminated my position. They had it all written up. And when I went for unemployment, the unemployment took a look at the job board and saw my position was listed. And the hospital had a lot of explaining to do. sometimes may need to step back to move forward. Like I said, I stepped back so I could put my position self in a position where I could go to the school, get the education. Invest in yourself. Come to these and get the CEUs, get the CBET. I know a lot of people will say, you know, what do I need a CBET for? You know, I've been a biomed for 20 years. My best friend, who's now passed away, was a CBET down at Baptist, down in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. The guy could fix anything, but he didn't have his CBET. The minute he got his CBET, he moved from being the biomed 3 to a supervisor. Now, when he was in the Navy, he was E6, so he was a supervisor in the Navy. But when he came to the outside, they didn't quite recognize that, and he had to work his way back up. And he didn't have, he also didn't have his associate's degree, which they held against him because they would have made him an assistant manager had he had that. But you know, it's like you have to prepare yourself. You have to look at what my next step is. Where do I want to be? Do I want to be up in New York? You know, I'm not talking about New York City. I'm talking about Western New York, you know, where you actually have trees and stuff. Take a look at the jobs that they're offering. See what their requirements are for the position you want. When I moved to California to take a position out there, everybody says California is expensive. Obviously, they haven't lived over here at Hanover over by Arundel Mills. Because when I compared the cost of living, and this is something else you want to use, it's a cost of living indicator. Just Google in what's the difference in cost of living between Hanover, Maryland, and Sacramento, California. It was 28% cheaper than living here. Now that's has started to change since everybody started leaving California, but you know, and when I was a recruiter, you know, I had these guys, well, I'm making more than that. It's wait a second once. You're fixing big med cameras, you're putting in 60 hours a week. I'm getting you a job in a hospital for $4 more an hour, and you don't have to work a 40-hour week. Yeah, but I'm making this. Yeah, but you're working a part-time job. And I said, if I was your manager and I saw how much you were making, first thing I'd be doing is looking for another person to come in, because now I've got enough business for 2 guys, and I can start branching out with 2 guys because you're only putting in 40 hours a week each. And now I can build it up so both of you are putting in 20 hours, and when both of you are putting in another 20 hours, I can hire a 3rd person. That's part of the business management that you have to look at when you're into the business. You know, how do I use my assets? And like I said, you're an asset. And, you know, people will promote over you. They'll go outside the company and they'll bring somebody else in because you are valuable where they're at. Because if you move up to the next position, it's going to take you 3 months to sort of learn the position. They bring somebody in to replace you. It's going to take another 3 months for them to get up into the position. So that's going to stunt. So we're going to want to take the stunt in 1 position or 2 positions. But it's your career. You have to decide what you want, where you want to be, and make sure that you are qualified. Just like the 298, you know, with the penny loafers. Now, if you had $3, you got the 2 pennies to put in there. And the reason they had 2 pennies in there was because back when Roger was a teenager, you could 2 pennies was what it cost to make a telephone call if you got stuck out on the road and had to use a payphone. When I was a kid, it was dimes, you know, a dime to make a phone call. That was, you had 2 of them. One to make a call to your parents to let them know what's going on. One to call her parents to let them know where you're broken down at, so her dad can come out, chew you out for driving a piece of junk car and putting his dollar in the works. My father-in-law did that to me. But it's really important to invest in yourself. You need to be thinking about where you want to be and what you want to do. Don't look at where your next, not only your next career move, but rather look ahead 10 years and continue to do this. Every time you take a new position, look ahead 10. You know, get into this next position. What's the next position you want to go for? Again, see what is required in your next career move. You're gaining the skills for your next move. You know, the biomed ones are learning all, or should be learning all the equipment they can learn in the hospital so that they're qualified. They should be applying for every time a new piece of equipment comes to the hospital. Hey, I'd like to learn how to fix that. I'd like to learn how to fix that. You know, step 4, volunteer yourself. You know, you become the dialysis expert and they send you off to school, depending on how many dialysis machines you got. I got 40 at one hospital. And whenever I get the guy trained up on that, that's pretty much going to be what he does. And then the other guy, when I train him up on ventilators, I got 91 of those. So, you know, that's a full-time job right there for him. If you can't get training where you are at, gain experience and be looking for somebody who will give you the training. Now, I know this is going to sound a little bit strange, but even though I had military training on X-ray, there was still a couple machines that I needed a little bit more help on. And I talked to RSTI. I actually knew the original founder of RSTI. He wouldn't have had his first class if he wouldn't have called me up and said, Joe, do you have the schematics for a 1717 picker? Yeah. Can you send them to me? All right, I'll send them out next week. He said, no, you don't understand. My first class as for RSTI is on Monday. I need them before that. So I overnighted it to him. I actually paid for myself to get training. And if you're paying out of your own pocket, they sometimes have scholarships. So if you want to move into the X-ray field, you you may have to use a little bit of vacation to go out there for 3 or 4 or 5 days. But you're investing in yourself. You invest in yourself, they can't take it away from you. I was unemployed one time. I was between jobs. It was because I had knee surgery and I couldn't work. But I called some guys up in Massachusetts and said, hey, I want you to teach me how to tune up a camera on a fluoro room. And these guys said, sure, come on up, we'll teach you. I went up there, I used my network to get some training. And these guys taught me how to tune up a camera. Well, the next company I was working for, it seemed like I had fluoro rooms going down all the time, not because of what I was doing, but because they hadn't been maintained. I had TV camera tubes that were burnt. They were scorched. I mean, they just really weren't showing the definition that you needed to be able to do a proper diagnostic fluoroscope. And within that company, I became the go-to guy. Every time there was a camera that went down, they would call me and say, hey, we need you to come in and take a look at this. So people are staying in the workforce longer. How old do you think I am?
37.
Not even close.
58.
Nope.
65.
65. I would like to retire right now, but I can't retire. Or I could, but I would take a big cut because it used to be you could retire at 62 and you got like 25 or 35% of Social Security. And at 50 or 65, you got 50%. And then if you retire at 70, you sort of got it all. Well, that's changed. I now have to work until I'm 66 and 8 months to where I get the 50%, that my dad used to get when he was 65. And so that's me. You guys are in a little bit deeper because your careers are going to have to go until you're about 67 minimum, but I think they're now pushing it. It's more like 68 or 69.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you really need to start looking at your plan. I know. I mean, but you know what? I'm hurting you, and I apologize for that. I took a job down in Georgia as a manager of a 3-hospital system. And because I'm the manager, I'm preventing somebody younger than me to have that position. Now, a lot of the people in the biomedical field are a little bit older than me, and so they've been retiring out, so that has created, a lot more. Promotions are coming quicker. Techs are moving to new organizations to move up. That's not uncommon. The average time for submission for being hired right now for biomeds is somewhere between 6 to 10 weeks. And I'm going to say use fact, logic, common good sense. You know, when you're looking at why you're moving, what am I going to gain out of this when I move? And for the managers, when you're looking at a resume and it looks like that person jumped around, think of me. I didn't jump to just jump. I had direction. I knew why I wanted that company. I knew what I wanted to get out of that. And I was being either promoted into a position, I was getting training, and that was why I moved. And it was when I couldn't go up any higher. Why should I stop my career because the position isn't available? Look at jobs as if a car. When a guy's young, he drives a Corvette. He's single. Gets married, okay, well, we might move up to a Toyota Corolla. When the kids come along, now you're driving a minivan or an SUV. And then when you get much older, you're back to the Corvette at normal Sundays. Or a Prius. But the thing is, look at jobs as being a vehicle to get you to where you want to be and what you want to be. So, any questions? Have I answered some questions? Yes.
So you're saying the associate's degree is great for them that want to pursue for a master's. Do you think that, I know you say to look first what it needs to progress, like just continuing education or that goes?
So I had my associates when I came out of Fishel, or I got it shortly after, because I had taken all the courses. That was in 78. In 98 is when I went back and got my bachelor's degree because I wanted to move into management, and I was seeing that the management positions were requiring a bachelor's degree. Okay. They weren't asking, was I a biomed 2 or a biomed 3 after that. They saw that I had a bachelor's degree. And so that qualified me, so to speak, because they wanted me for my management skills, not my technical skills. And then in 2008, 10 years later, I went back for my master's, did it in 1 year. That's the story on its own. But it was so that I would get recognition, you know, I'd be recognized not necessarily as an equal, but think of a senior in high school talking to a sixth grader. How do you think that conversation goes? Sixth grader isn't really listened to too much by the senior in high school. And sometimes when you're in management, that happens because you've got, you know, usually the directors of the hospitals or the CEOs of hospitals, they've got a master's degree. So my doctor, or the person we have, it's our CEO, she actually is a doctor, but when I'm talking to the CEO or I'm talking to the chief of nursing office, from that little MBA on the back there sort of lets them know I'm at the same plane as them. But it also prepares me, I feel it prepared me to be able to make better decisions, to understand finances, and to make clinical decisions. I mean, here's a quick one I made 2 weeks ago. I have 150 Alaris pumps. It's going to cost me $36,000 to replace the front and back case. There's a small screen which is no longer supported by Alaris. It'll cost $750,000 to replace it. I found a source that will sell me the whole pump, including the network card, for $50 a piece, and they've already been PM'd. They've already been refurbished. That's going to cost me $7,500. Which decision, you know, do you think it's a better decision, especially in a hospital that's sort of closed down and they haven't decided whether they're going to open it up yet, but they want to have that capability available if they decide to open up. $7,500 doesn't even put it on the capital expense. It's just a parts expense. And I can use the other 150 now for internal parts because cases are cracked. So I feel that, you know, getting those 2 degrees helped me make better financial decisions and put them up. So, any other questions? Okay, make sure you sign the sheet, and if you got any CEUs that you need, make sure you scan the thing in the back. I thank you for listening to me.